General Ben Hodges, former U.S. troops commander in Europe, welcome back to Diplomatic Passport.
Thanks for the opportunity.
General, the topic of war is something that everyone seems to be good at, so the subject itself either gets boring or either goes towards conspiracy theories. Why shall we not diminish the importance of an ongoing war, and also why shall we keep our attention towards what's happening both in Ukraine and between Israel and Hamas?
Well, I think, Christina, what we're seeing now is the end of the peace dividend that we all enjoyed at the end of the Cold War, and we thought, that's it, you know, we don't have to worry about nuclear war with the Soviet Union anymore, and so it became known as the peace dividend. The problem with the peace dividend mentality was that everybody quit doing what they needed to do. We forgot, it was not the end of history, we forgot history, and we're naive in thinking that you could, with globalization, we would all be connected, we would all need each other economically, and there would be no reason to go to war. I mean, obviously, that was not the case. The war in Ukraine is, in my view, what failed deterrence looks like. Because we, the West, we did nothing after Russia invaded Georgia. We did nothing in Syria after the Russians and the Assad regime jumped over President Obama's red line. We did nothing really of consequence after Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014. The whole 20 years in Afghanistan ended up being a catastrophe. And then even in the U.S., our own for the first time in my life, we did not have a peaceful transition of power. And the whole January 6th tragedy, Germans were still building Nord Stream 2 late into 2021. So you could imagine that the Russians were thinking that we would not do anything if they went ahead and finished the job in Ukraine. And plus, the Ukrainians had not done everything they should have done before February last year. So the Russian ability to use disinformation to cause us to lose confidence in our elections, in our courts, in each other, stress on the alliance, that I think is partly why the Kremlin felt they could invade Ukraine. And then here a month ago, Hamas attacks Israel from the Gaza Strip. This is not a coincidence because the sponsor of Hamas is Iran. Iran is the closest ally of Russia. Russia needed some distraction because their campaign to destroy Ukraine was failing, and so they needed the distraction. I think that is part of what generated the Hamas attack on Israel. Of course, the way that Hamas attacked Israel, this is more than just normal terrorist attack where you blow everything up. I mean, the very specific way that they brutally murdered women, children, old people, was done in a way premeditated, we would say, because they were sure that Netanyahu would overreact. And of course he did. Now, everybody in Hamas should be killed. They don't care about Palestinian people, but when Prime Minister Netanyahu says the mission is to destroy Hamas, you can't destroy Hamas unless you eliminate the root cause. And the root cause, I think, is you've got 2 million Palestinians that have nowhere to go. It's a terrible situation for them. And so who benefits from this entire thing? Clearly Russia benefits the most from what has happened in Israel, but also Iran benefits because this put the brakes on the implementation of the Abraham Accord, which would have seen Arab countries moving closer to Israel. But because they were sure that Netanyahu specifically would overreact and respond with such force that it would be very difficult for Arab countries, even ones who don't like Hamas or Palestinians and who fear Iran, could not be seen embracing or working with Israel. So that's where we are now.
That's a break. The accords are still on the table, so
yes.
It's just a break, as you said.
Yeah, putting the brakes on them, that's correct.
Yeah. The death toll in Gaza Strip is rising, unfortunately, every day. And then again, as you said, Netanyahu overreacted, so the Israelis don't want to stop the bombing. They said until the hostages are back. How can we look to this dilemma? Because one side we have emotions, of course, definitely, and on the other side we have the intention of killing, dismantle Hamas.
Yeah, you know, from an Israeli perspective, of course, the fact that these 1,400 people were killed in such terrible ways, and that 200 more plus are still hostages, and then you're thinking about what's the future going to be? If they don't punish Hamas so severely, then maybe Hezbollah or others will think that they could come in and attack Israel. So part of this is about revenge, but part of it is about deterrence by punishment. The problem is that the end state described by the Prime Minister, and it's the job of the Prime Minister to describe what do we want it to look like when the operation is over? And he has only described destruction, that Hamas is destroyed. But what about the 2 million Palestinians? I mean, what are they supposed to do? Is that really the best way to ensure that Israel can live in peace with their neighbors? Now, for decades, people, brilliant diplomats and leaders have been trying to arrange that. So I don't mean to simplify the challenge, but for sure, Israel is not safer with the way it was on October the 6th or the way it is now. They're not safer. So there's got to be some sort of language that comes from the Prime Minister that lays out, we want to peacefully coexist with all of our Arab neighbors, and that means, that can only mean, I think, a two-state solution, which is what the U.S. has advocated for many years. That would require the leaders in Israel to be willing to do it, but also leaders in Palestine, the Palestinians and other Arab countries would have to be willing to do that. I don't see that happening with the current leadership, both on the Israeli side and on the Palestinian side. But you know, the U.S. has worked very hard to try and do this. Now, on the side of Hamas, of course, they know that they are violating the law, international law, by using hospitals and churches and refugee camps as a shield.
Yes.
I mean, this is completely against the law of armed conflict. But of course, they're a terrorist organization. They're not a state. So we should not be surprised that they are doing using terrorist tactics. But even still, the burden is on the Israeli force to protect innocent people. So even if you know if under the hospital or in the middle of this refugee camp is the headquarters for Hamas or a huge weapons cache, you can't just destroy it anyway because of all the innocent people that'll be there. So this is a very, very difficult task for Israeli soldiers to do what they're supposed to do, to not get killed. They have journalists on one shoulder, they have lawyers on another shoulder, everybody's watching, and Hamas, of course, is goading them to keep doing this. There is no easy answer to this.
Going back to the war Russian war in Ukraine, and we cannot compare it with the war between Israel and Hamas, but those two wars have something in common. When the Ukrainians showed to the public the massacres in Bucha and Borodyanka, and as well when Israelis showed to the international media the massacres in the kibbutzim, there were some voices saying this is fake, this is not true, those are not corpses, there were no attacks. Who is using this type of propaganda? Unfortunately,
there are people that are willing to believe that. They're willing to believe that what they see is not true, or they're not willing to believe what they see. is true. And so part of this is a reflection on all of us, lack of education, or people don't trust journalists, or they don't trust their own government, they don't trust international agencies. So there's always going to be some percentage that's there. In the U.S. for sure, we still have people that think the earth is flat. I mean, so you have to accept that there's a percentage of the population like that. But the Russians have been investing in disinformation for a very long time. It didn't start February last year. For years they have been working on creating narratives about how the war is the fault of NATO, the West is at fault, the CIA has done everything bad in the world, it's all our fault. And then, to say that President Zelensky is a Nazi, I mean, no logical thinking person would come to that conclusion, but yet it's said enough, and they're able to find a handful of images of Ukrainian nationalists that had symbols, and somehow that gets turned into President Zelensky is a Nazi. So effectively that even one of the Republican presidential candidates, Mr. Ramaswamy, has said that President Zelensky is a Nazi the other night on the debate. Now, that gentleman is no intellect or scholar, but the fact is he's at a level that he felt he could say that. So I don't know how we counter that except through constant efforts to help explain to all of our fellow citizens what is going on. And our societies have to start educating young people from the beginning to be critical thinkers, to listen to multiple news sources, to challenge what they hear and think about it, and to inform themselves, not just believe whatever comes from their favorite paper or station or social media website. I was struck by how fast, after October 7th, and then after the beginning of the Israeli operation into Gaza, how fast huge protests sprung up everywhere. I mean, that was amazing. And the fact that all of them had Palestinian flags. I did not realize Palestinian flags were so readily available everywhere, but yet you've got thousands of people with Palestinian flags in London, in New York, Washington, Paris, all over Europe. I think this was planned, that there was a planned media effort or information operation effort in advance of October the 7th to make sure that they could burst into these protests. I'm not saying those aren't people that have legitimate complaints and that they're legitimately angry, but there was an organization effort to it. And I think, again, who benefits the most? The Russians. The Russians are creating friction and chaos in the Middle East, across Africa, and all of this generates problems, pressure on us, U.S., Romania, Poland, Germany, UK, France, and our other allies.
Well, that was actually my next question. We see that Russia is involved in so many attempts of coup or successful coup in Africa all over this year. We see that they are waiving their friendship with Hamas, their friendship with Iran, of course. And then again, they want to be called themselves a superpower or a big power. In the meantime, United States is actually going all over the place and trying to keep the peace, because the peace is the most important and precious thing humanity has. How can you call yourself a superpower or a big power if everything you do is just to create troubles?
I think you have accurately described the comparison between how the West tries to deal with problems versus what is Russia doing. You know, when Russia, or particularly Russia, when they try to help countries in Africa or the Middle East. Of course, they're not helping the average African, the typical villager. What they're doing is they're using money and influence with the leaders in these countries in exchange for access to mines or other necessary rare earth materials. And then they provide private military company, Wagner-type organizations to help with training or security or to keep these guys in power. So it's a different approach, obviously, and all I can say is that we have to compete there. We have to invest in these countries, but doing it in a way that does not just add money to the pockets of the rulers there. It's easy for me to say. It is very, very difficult to do. We've been trying for years to do that. I think that the challenges for the millions of people in Africa who are suffering because of climate change and because of corruption in their own governments, and the Russians put gasoline on that, whereas the West is trying to find ways to address the root causes of their problems.
Oh my God, suntem aici pentru cei stresați și obosiți, pentru cele care sunt mofturoase și pofticioase în zilele acelea ale lunii, pentru cei care lucrează overtime mereu, pentru cei care își fac mușchii să plângă. Suntem aici pentru cei care, oh my God, încă nu-și dau seama că au nevoie de magneziu. Alege cea mai bună variantă de Jameson Magneziu pentru tine. Acesta este supliment alimentar. Citiți cu atenție prospectul sau informațiile de pe ambalaj.
Pierde ultimele zile de Black Friday. Ia-ți Motorola G84 în culoarea Viva Magenta la 1199,9 lei și Moto G23 cu 8 GB memorie RAM la 599,9 lei. Ofertă valabilă la Altex și Media Galaxy.
Atunci când iau antibiotic, încep cu Linex Forte încă din prima zi. O capsulă la 3 ore după administrarea dozei de antibiotic. Începe cu Linex Forte.
Zic francezii că bœuf din salată bœuf înseamnă vită. La noi involuntari, vita-i pui. Eu să zic salată bœuf. Și dacă mă enervez, pun niște mere rase.
Susținem bucătăria românească cu toți rebelii din ea. Pentru salată cum vrei tu, la noi ai piept de curcan dezosat la 3,29 lei, dar și lămâi la 4,49 lei. Carrefour.
Când găsești remediul perfect pentru tuse, vrei să-l dai tuturor. 7 plante și 5 uleiuri esențiale fac din Calmotusin remediul perfect pentru orice tip de tuse. Acum și Calmotusin Junior, ursuleț cu căpșuni sub formă de jeleuri. Calmotusin, balsam pentru căile respiratorii. Acestea sunt suplimente alimentare. Citiți cu atenție prospectul.
Iubești Crăciunul? Trăiește-l fără grija prețurilor. Alături de Kaufland trăiești Crăciunul fără compromisuri, împreună cu cei dragi ție. Iubești Crăciunul? Trăiește-l la pachet cu prețuri mici. Trăiește-l fresh, cu produse de la producători români și de calitate, pe care le găsești într-un singur loc. Atunci când ai tot ce-ți dorești, trăiești Crăciunul din plin. Kaufland.
Biofen Extra începe să oprească durerile puternice în 10 minute prin acțiunea dublă dintre ibuprofen și paracetamol. Biofen Extra. Extra putere contra durere.
Ce ador la atmosfera de sărbători? Pot să o scot ca prin magie, chiar și dintr-o cutie. Prepară ușor biscuiți delicioși cu zahărul mărgăritar pudră. Zahăr mărgăritar, iată ce știu să fac.
Atunci când te doare capul, e ca și când... Cu Pasconal acționezi împotriva durerii de cap.
Pasconal pune capac durerii de cap.
Ei decid pe banii tăi.
Ei își asumă răspunderea, dar tu ești cel care plătește.
Noi predăm puterea oamenilor din stradă,
care trăiesc, muncesc, își cresc copiii și plătesc taxe. Aici, în România.
Facem legătura între cei nemulțumiți
și cei care iau decizii.
Live cu Alexandru Rotaru și Robert Chiș în fiecare vineri la ora 18.
Russia is, as I said, friend with Iran. Also is developing a new friendship with North Korea, which is not that new anymore. And that we saw what happens when these three countries get together. It's bad for the rest of the world and especially for peace. How shall we look at the relationship between Russia and China when it comes to what's happening at the level of the world?
To the first set of relationships, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, that to me shows the effectiveness of sanctions and the damage being done to Russia's industry, defense industry, because of their war with Ukraine. The fact that Vladimir Putin had to fly 11 time zones to ask Kim Jong-un for old artillery ammunition is quite a statement. And then their work with Iran over the years, I don't know, but I imagine they are providing nuclear technology, information, help to Ukraine, to the Iranians, while Iran, of course, is providing drones. I mean, Russia has to ask Iran for drones is also interesting to me. And you saw probably the other day that Russia has now reached out to Pakistan and Egypt, who are former customers, saying, hey, we need some helicopter engines that we sold to you.
Get it back.
Yeah, can we have them back? Yeah. So I think that Russia's defense industry is in much worse shape than maybe what people believe, and that's why that's part of the reason I remain so optimistic about Ukraine. China, of course, I've never believed this nonsense that they are friends without limits or friends forever or whatever the description was. They're definitely not allies. The fact that they may do exercises together occasionally is not inconsequential, but it's not significant to me. What I am interested in is what sort of material aid does China actually provide? Are they providing regular ammunition, or are they providing components for precision weapons? I imagine there's some of that, but I can't tell that it's happening in a quantity that makes a difference. I think that China, and you see, of course, that the Treasurer of China and Secretary Yellen of the U.S., they just met in anticipation of President Xi and President Biden meeting soon, hopefully. I don't want to say everything's great there, but clearly I think the United States is working hard to not decouple from China, to be clear about our expectations, but so I'm actually impressed with what I see there. The Chinese see Russia, I believe, as the junior partner in their relationship. They see Russia as the source of cheap gas, and of course the Chinese don't want that interrupted. The Chinese know that it will become increasingly easy to come over the top of through the Arctic. So for them, shipping, that will be a significant improvement. So they don't want anything from Russia disrupting that. But I don't think that they want to see a collapse of the Russian Federation, not because they love Putin, but because they prefer a status quo, stability for their own sake, and maybe a long, gradual collapse would be okay. I thought it was helpful that President Xi said no nuclear weapons. That would not be acceptable.